So if you own the GoPro Hero 12 and you would like to get the smoothest, best looking footage straight out of the camera, today I'm going to show you how to do that. So you don't need any special gear other than your Hero 12, but if you want to have a little bit of an extra edge with your footage, I do recommend picking up this 4-pack of ND filters from Freewell. But what I'm going to show you today does not require these. These are simply a bonus if you do have them. So one of the key features to getting the smoothest, best looking footage out of your GoPro Hero 12 is that horizon lock and horizon leveling mode. So what these modes do is they kind of give a boost to hypersmooth, but you don't have to have hypersmooth on boost. So if you have hypersmooth set to on with the standard hypersmooth setting, which I did for all of the sample clips you're seeing today, I filmed it just with basic hypersmooth, but all of these were filmed with horizon lock and horizon leveling. And the advantage of horizon lock and leveling is if you're walking along, like if you're hiking like I was, or if you're vlogging and holding the camera here and talking to it, it's not going to make your steps, the steps you're taking, as obvious as it otherwise would. And you probably know what I'm talking about. If you're walking along and maybe you're not focusing extra hard on walking smoothly, every step you take, the camera is going to kind of be going like this. And what I've found is with horizon lock and horizon leveling, it helps dampen that quite a bit. So I find it more enjoyable because I don't have to focus so much on walking smoothly. I can just walk along, run along, whatever I'm doing. And I also don't have to worry about if the camera gets tilted a little bit. Of course, in horizon lock, it doesn't matter at all if the camera gets tilted. In horizon leveling, you can tilt it as far as 45 degrees and it will still stay level to the horizon. So really, that is one of the keys. And the nice thing on the Hero 12 is you can do horizon lock and horizon leveling, both in that 5.3K mode. Now, there are some differences with the frames per second you can be in, depending on what you're using. But being able to get 5.3K footage out of the camera, even with that slight crop, that footage still looks really, really good. So what I'm going to show you next is I'm going to show you all the precise settings that I use, and I'm going to explain with each one why I use it. So first of all, you might notice I have the ISO and shutter speed down here at the bottom. If you're wondering why you don't see that in your Hero 12, that is part of a special QR code using the GoPro Labs firmware. If you'd like to learn more about the GoPro Labs firmware, I will link to that video above if you want to check that out after this video. There are features of the GoPro Labs firmware that I consider very useful, and this is one of them. So what we want to do here is we want to make sure we're in video mode. So you can adjust your modes clicking on the mode button here. Once you're in video mode, you want to click down here at the bottom, and it doesn't matter which of these presets you select. We can adjust them accordingly. So you can select any of them here, or you can go down to the bottom and select create new preset. So I'm going to go down to the bottom and I'm going to click create new preset, and we're just going to do the checkbox there. And then we're going to key in our settings here. So for the profiles here, these settings I'm going to show you today, you do have to be using either standard or log. With the HDR mode, you are a little bit more limited in the options you can select. And that's because the HDR has a lot more going on inside the camera with the processing. So it can't do as much when it comes to horizon level and lock if you're in the HDR mode. So if you don't want to do any color grading later on, I recommend selecting standard. If you do want to grade later on, select log. For now, I'm just going to keep it set to standard. And we want to have it in the 16:9 resolution. In order to use horizon lock or leveling, you do have to be in 16:9. For the resolution, I do recommend selecting 5.3K. If you select 4K, you can do this as well in 4K. 5.3K is about 50% more resolution than 4K. And what I do is I export my footage as 4K, so it gives me an extra bonus with that footage quality when I export it as 4K, because there's more pixels in there crammed together, and it makes the footage look extra good. So one of the components of getting a really good looking footage is having 5.3K to start with. Now for the frame rate here, I recommend doing 24 or 30 if you don't want to slow it down later on. And if you do want to slow it down later on, you want to do 60. But the key is with 5.3K 60, if you go over here and click on the L+, it's going to tell you that it can do lens linear plus horizon leveling. So if you do 5.3K 60, you can get that horizon leveling, but you can't get the horizon lock in the 5.3K 60. But with the horizon leveling, you can tilt your GoPro up to 45 degrees either way, and it's still going to keep the horizon level. So if you do want to do the horizon lock, you can do this up to 5.3K 30. So if you click on the L+ here now, it shows you lens linear plus horizon lock. And of course, in 5.3K 24, you could also do that. Either 24 or 30 frames per second will work for the horizon lock. So what I like to do is I like to put two different modes here. I like to create one with the 5.3K 60 with the horizon leveling. And then I like to create another one with the 5.3K 30 with horizon leveling. But for now, I'm going to create the one with horizon lock. And I'm going to do 5.3K 24. So we're going to click the L plus and we're going to key that in. And then hyper smooth, I keep this set to on, but I don't do auto boost. If you do auto boost, it's going to introduce more of a crop in your footage. And the hyper smooth on combined with the horizon lock is more than enough to create really good stabilization. The capture section will not apply here. These settings are unrelated to this, so I'm going to ignore that. For the Pro Tune settings, for the shutter speed, you can keep this set to auto in most cases, but if you are going to be going into lower light, or if you want to do anything with ND filters, you can set a static value here. So if you have your shutter speed set to 1/192 or higher, that's generally going to be fine and not create any ghosting or jitter in your footage, especially if you're going into lower light. But if you do have it set to that value, what you're going to find is you're going to find your footage is overexposed if it's a bright sunny day. So what you want to do in that case is you would want to put an ND filter on. That's where that shutter speed and ISO values at the bottom can really help you determine if you need ND filters or not. I'll show you that after I key in the settings here. Another helpful thing, if you have the shutter speed set to 1/192, that will prevent jitter and ghosting, but it will also keep that shutter speed as low as possible. And a slower shutter speed does give you more appealing looking footage. It's got that more natural motion blur without all those really sharp frames. So there is an advantage to setting this as low as you can while still keeping hyper smooth on. But you will most likely need ND filters unless it's not bright out. So I'm going to keep it set to this and I will show you later on. But if you're not going to use ND filters and you're not going to be going into low lighting, you can just keep this set to auto. For the white balance, I do recommend setting this to a static value. If you want a little bit of a cooler look to your footage, do 5000K. If you want a little bit warmer look, do 5500K. I'm going to keep it set to 5500K. For the ISO min, I recommend setting it to 100. And the ISO max, I recommend setting that to 800. It's going to help ensure your ISO doesn't boost so far that it makes your footage grainy. For the sharpness, I recommend low or medium. If you're going to do any editing later on, I recommend low. You can add a little bit of sharpness. If you're not going to edit later on, I recommend medium. For the color, I recommend natural, because if you're going to color grade the footage later on, then I recommend doing the log mode that I showed you at the start. And if you're going to do the log mode, that of course is going to be very flat to start with, and then you can use that GoPro LUT later on to color grade that footage. So all of the footage samples you're seeing today, I did film those in log, and then I did grade them later on, because that's my personal preference. I do like to do that grading. I feel like it gets even better looking footage. So if you want the very best looking footage, I do recommend log in the grading. But if you want it right out of the camera, color natural does look good as well. And that is 10-bit footage. These other settings here just apply to audio. They don't apply to this. So we're going to click the check mark, and I'm just going to call this custom right here. So we've got that custom mode set now. We've got the shutter speed of 1/192, and our ISO right here is 425 right now, which is not a problem. Ideally, we'd like the camera to have an ISO as close to 100 as possible. So if I was to take this outside in bright lighting, this ISO would quickly drop to 100, but the footage would also be overexposed. The footage would look really white and washed out. So what we would need to do to resolve that is we would need to put an ND filter on. So I'm going to show you here how to do the ND filter on the Hero 12. So what we're going to do, I'm going to turn the camera here so you can see the angle. In order to take the lens cover off, you just have to pull out and twist either left or right while pulling out. And it's going to pop off right there. And then for the ND filters, we want to probably do either an ND8 or an ND16 if it's not a super bright day out. So right now it's not a super bright day out. So I'm going to pop on ND8 and just start it off at an angle and then twist left or right till it pops into place. So that popped into place quite easily there. And if I turn this back around, we can take a look at the screen here and you can see what that did. Of course, inside, what it did is it kept our shutter speed set to the static value, but it instantly bumped the ISO up to 800. And that's because the ISO was trying to go up as much as it can to brighten the footage as much as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a light here in front of the camera, and you can see this is kind of mimicking that daylight. So when we put the light right there, point it right up into the lens, that drops the ISO down to about slowly creeping down still. So what that means though is we got the ISO all the way down to 114, 113 with the shutter speed of 1/192. So as long as that ISO is still above 100, that means your footage is not going to be overexposed. But if the ISO does drop all the way to 100, you will want to check your camera closely to make sure the footage is not overexposed. It is possible to get it just perfect where it's like right at 100 or just slightly above and not have overexposed footage. That would be the case in this case. If your footage was overexposed, then you would want to take the ND filter of 8 off and you'd want to put on ND 16. So you can see when I pull the light away, it immediately goes back to ISO 800. So I can take off this ND filter and you can see when I take it off, it of course goes back to about ISO 423, which is perfectly fine if you were outside and you had ISO 420 with shutter speed of 1/192. That is also perfectly fine exposure. There'll be no problems there. What I'm going to do here just to show you, I'm going to put ND 16 on. And of course, ND 16, it's even darker and it put the ISO to 800 there as well. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to bring this light back up, put the light at its brightest, I'll point it right at it. And with ND 16, because of how much light this is filtering out, I have to get this light really close to get the ISO to drop a little. And with ND 16, even with the bright light right there, I'm only getting the ISO down to about 350. Now, an ISO of 350 is also perfectly fine. So if you were outside on a bright day and you used ND 16 to get your ISO to about 330, 350, that's perfectly fine. That means you probably have enough wiggle room that even if you were pointing at the sun or away from the sun, you probably would still be fine. So that's where this is really valuable down here, to have an idea of what your ISO and shutter speed values are so that you can perfect the exposure the way you want it. And I would like to demonstrate, if I was to go back to auto shutter speed, I want to show you how this would fluctuate. So if I go back here to auto shutter speed, you can see how the shutter speed does drop. And what the GoPro will do by default is it's going to try to find a good balance with shutter speed and ISO, but the GoPro is also programmed to not drop too slow on the shutter speed unless it has to. So what would happen, I'm going to pull away this light. If you were to go into a dimly lit area, your ISO is going to boost as high as it can to 800, but that's going to not be enough to properly expose your footage. So what's going to happen is it's going to drop the shutter speed all the way down to 30. And if you have a shutter speed anything below about 1/192, like I mentioned earlier, your footage is going to get jittery and have ghosting and it's not going to look good. That is an example of why it's a good idea, if you're going to be in lower lighting, to use a static shutter speed and then use ND filters as needed to tweak the ISO. Show you again here. If we put the light up here, camera's going to boost the shutter speed back up to a faster shutter speed, and then it's going to lower the ISO a bit. And that right there is actually a good exposure. If you had a shutter speed of 1/240 and an ISO of about 560, that's also fine. So definitely play around with it to suit your needs. But the keys here are using that horizon lock or horizon leveling, which automatically puts you in linear mode. Linear doesn't have any of that fisheye distortion, so you get really good footage there. And if you want to slow down your horizon leveling footage from the 60 frames per second to 24 or 30 frames per second, depending on what your timeline is, it's also going to do great for that. The footage in the 60 frames per second is going to look even more stable when you slow it down like that. So if you'd like to learn more about how to get the best footage from the Hero 12, check out this playlist right here.